I'm alive. I am here. I'm sorry for the break in content. Some things happened in my real life and I just had to prioritize that over. And it was really inconvenient timing with a new raid coming out. But speaking of the raid, so basically I have never really been one to be really big on raids. Kind of my goal with raids is I want to beat it and I want to be able to do enough to help my guild, like do my part, do my contribution, and understand enough about it so that I can go in and not just get totally slaughtered and get my butt handed to me, because that's no fun. So that's kind of how I think about raids. So I'm in no way trying to like have the best scores or these crazy teams or do the most damage or anything like that. But I thought that actually like a very nub like basic simple view might actually be helpful, because this raid is pretty complicated and there's a lot going on. So let's talk about it. And this site, this is SWGOH.gg. If you're not using this site, you're doing it wrong. So let's start looking at some of these abilities. So into phase 1, you get the special ability called Unbreakable Will, and and by the way, for all of this, I'm not going to be really talking that much about specific teams, because that's kind of like a whole area of content on its own. This is basically just like things that I've learned and little tips and tricks and like key takeaways from my time playing around in the raid with like retreating many times. But so if you disagree or if you have other things, please leave it in the comments. Okay, so phase 1, you get this ability Unbreakable Will that makes you unkillable and you have to suck up all the damage, and you have to use this around Nihilist's Annihilate. So what we know about Nihilist is that he's this ticking time bomb with Annihilate, and the thing that you have to really pay attention to in this phase is his cooldowns on the top right. And it's really tricky because since he's a raid boss, he's doing multiple things at once, so it kind of feels like you can't predict it that well, but if you really pay attention, then you can predict it. And this is a phase that will likely never be autoable because you really have to time Unbreakable Will with his Annihilate. But if you really pay attention to those abilities at the top, you start learning when Annihilate is going to come and kind of the situations where you need to trigger that Unbreakable Will. For example, if he has his like ability that raises his minions, he will do that before he does his like Force Drain thing. If he doesn't, he will do Force Drain, and if he's doing Force Drain first, then he could reduce his cooldown for Annihilate and then use Annihilate. But if he's doing something before Force Drain, then if Force Drain is reducing the cooldown for Annihilate, but it's on the second turn, then he won't use Annihilate to the next turn. If he has Annihilate off cooldown, then he will use it at the next available chance. But so it's kind of hard to explain like all the different scenarios, but if you really pay attention to those, retreat all the time, just kind of get used to it, that does wonders for the phase, because then you can perfectly time your Unbreakable Will. Other really important things about this phase is he will, where is it? Where is the stupid little annoying thing that he does? This one. Okay, so if you're wondering why you were like hammering away and going after him and doing so many turns and you did like no damage, this is probably why. So what's happening is if you are attacking him with a basic ability, then you can get defense down. And if you attack him again with a basic ability, then he will regain protection. And you have to cut through that protection again to do damage. So basically what's happening is you are going to want to have tunes that can get rid of that defense down. And you are really going to want to steer clear of teams that are very basic dependent. So teams that have a ton of assists without cleanse. So Ewoks, especially with the Zeta Trooper, are just like the worst possible thing for this phase because they're using so many basic attacks that they just keep getting defense down on themselves and attacking him with defense down. So they're just piling protection on him and they can't chip it away and they don't have enough cleanse to get rid of it. So the reason that Jedi Ray teams are so strong here is because they're reducing their cooldown, so they're using a lot of special abilities. They're not using their basics that much. And they're gaining a lot of their own turn meters, so they can take a lot of turns. And Ray's assist, she can cleanse people, so that's why those teams are so strong. Another really important thing for this phase is, where is it? His Drain Force and his basic, they both ignore protection. So healing is absolutely essential for this phase. You don't necessarily have to have a healer, although it helps, but every single toon needs to have a way to heal itself. So on a Jedi Ray team, the kind of team that everyone's using is Jedi Ray with BB-8, Resistance Trooper, Scavenger Ray, and then some people use R2-D2, some people use a healer. But if you're using something like R2-D2, then Jedi Ray and BB-8 and R2 can kind of be kept healed up with their Zetas. But Scavenger Ray and Resistance Trooper, if you don't have a healer, need a way to heal themselves. And so what's happening is they have a little bit of health steal. So if you can get Illuminated Destiny up and you have enough turns, just by their damage alone, they can heal themselves. But they have to have that option, because if they get Unbreakable Will put on them, and with all of this Force Drain and Nihilist going through their protection, they desperately need a way to heal. Otherwise, they're just going to die. So having mechanics for healing and kind of abusing Foresight is a kind of a way to get around this, to try and keep them alive, give them a little bit more time to use their abilities to heal back up a little bit. The last kind of note that I have on here for phase 1 is that a Dispel is really important. Nihilus will, where is it? He will steal your buffs. His basic is he's stealing your buffs. And on a Jedi Ray team, when you have Illuminated Destiny, when he steals the buffs off of Scavenger Ray, it's like, ah, man, come on. It's so frustrating. So Foresight is really good to try and block him from stealing, but he does take 2 turns, so it is possible. So if you're using a lot of buffs, especially offense, because you really don't want like his AoE to be done when he has a bunch of offense. So having a Dispel or 2 is really important. I like having 2. I feel like I need 2. So I use Jedi Ray and Resistance Trooper as my Dispeller. My rice is ready. My rice cooker sings to me when it's done. But there's I have some patrons that want a series of me cooking. But this is I'm kind of cooking right now. I'm making rice, cooking with crazy. Okay, so on to phase 2. I like, and with the ads, the little people on the side, you try to always kill Assassin before Marauder, because Assassin will stealth and then it's really hard to kill her. Okay, phase 2. The special for phase 2 is Soothe, and this is a really simple ability. It's kind of intuitive, and the intention of this phase was you have to play this balancing act of how much pain do you allow to stack before you soothe, because if you let it go too far, then Scion will kind of take you out. But basically the method that I've been using for this phase, I like this phase because it's kind of simple, but the method I've been doing is, so for example, my favorite team to use in this raid so far is Night Sisters, and what I'll do is I will only soothe my big damage dealers. So like my Daka, and Talia, Zombie, all the ones that their point is not to be doing a ton of damage, I will soothe them all the time. But like Asajj and Acolyte, they're the ones that I want doing a ton of damage, so I will kind of let them go to Cycle of Suffering and stack that pain on so they can do a ton of damage. It's really good with Night Sisters, because then if they die, then Daka can just bring them back. It's so nice. I love Night Sisters, they're so fun. But so that's kind of how I've been using Soothe, is I just kind of abuse Soothe on my healers and my tanks and all that, and then my big damage dealers, or especially like Leia and Acolyte, because they only get hit with an AoE because they're always stealthed. Just let them go to Suffering and go nuts. Phase 3. Oh, this phase. Okay, so the first 2 phases, I feel like the bonuses are kind of like really intuitive, but phase 3, I'm like, I have no idea what I feel like I am not using standalone like anywhere near its full potential or how it's intended. So this is one where I'm still really learning. And it's really finicky because like if you use standalone while she's toppled, then she comes out of topple like instantly. It's really weird. But then if she's not toppled and you can do an AoE and just like instantly topple her, like I did that with Asajj Ventress and she just won AoE and she was, it was just weird. I don't know. So the main team I'm seeing for phase 3 is, I think, this might be the Chex Mix team, I don't know, but it's the Luke lead with a Zeta Han and Death Trooper, so you can get Death Mark down, and then you have like a support that can give tenacity up, and then another attacker that gives Han offense. So basically what's happening is you lay down Death Mark and get some tenacity up so that Han won't get dazed, and then you just let Han go pew, 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 and just like bam, do a bunch of damage with Death Mark on and while he's standing alone. And then that's it. And it's a ton of damage. That's as far as I feel like we've gotten with phase 3. It's really, really weird. And you can only use the standalone on each unit once, so you can't like abuse that mechanic or like that team. You can't abuse it with Han more than once. And you really have to pay attention to. So the thing you have to really pay attention to in phase 1 is the cooldowns. On phase 2, it's, you know, how high your pain is getting. And with phase 3, it's the buffs that are on the sabers, because especially if they have like Foresight or Retribution, because they will daze, which is bad if you're using a Luke lead or someone that's assisting or some team that's like gaining its own turn meter a bunch. That's bad. And then it can also dispel and do ability block, which is really bad for tunes like Zeta Kylo. I learned that the hard way. So that's what you really need to pay attention to, is the buffs on the sabers themselves. And then if you have teams that are really, really heavily reliant on their like team synergy, it might be kind of a problem because Isolate kind of removes that. So it's nice to have tunes, I think, in this phase, like Wampa, Zeta Kylo, if you can keep him from not being ability block, kind of tunes like that are more like solo, so it's not the end of the world if they get isolated. This is a really weird phase. Really, really weird. Another little note that I have, I learned this the hard way, is that when you're isolated, if you die, you can't be revived. I was sitting there with Daka like, come back, come back. He wasn't coming back. And then the last little note, it's kind of annoying, she will copy your Foresight. So a Foresight heavy team isn't the best here because she'll just copy you on that. All right, and then P4. So phase 4 is kind of like the kitchen sink zone. Oh, I haven't been scrolling. I'm horrible. Crazy, what are you doing? I'm busy talking. Was there anything I forgot? I don't think so. This phase is just so weird. I even stare at the text like, what? Okay, so into phase 4. So you have the same buffs that you've been having kind of before, but they're tweaked a little bit. Unbreakable Will is still the same. Soothe All now soothes everyone, so you can't do like what I do in phase 2 with the little target soothes. And then you also get the ability to remove Isolated. But the thing to really notice is that the Soothe only goes on healers and supports, and then attackers and tanks get this stand together where you can remove an Isolated. So removing an Isolated, you only want like 1 or 2 of these. You need like at least 2 Soothes, I would say. I try to have only like 2 attackers and tanks, and then like 3 healers and supports. And this is really hard to structure because, at least for me, whenever I'm bringing a team in, unless it's like a really faction-specific team, I have a ton of attackers and tanks. I have like no healers and supports. Like my rebels, I have like no healers and supports on there. And even Chirrut is labeled as an attacker. So it's just that, like, keeping that in mind is really tricky. That's the tricky part for this phase, in my opinion, is like just bringing in the right team so that you have the right abilities in the first place. Because if you don't have a Soothe available, you're going to have a really bad time and you're going to die really, really fast. And you need quite a few. But for the removing and isolate, I don't think you need more than 2. You might end up needing more attackers, but that ability you only need like 2 of, I think. But as far as this phase goes, it's a really heavily like kitchen sink, just kind of whatever you have left over. And you've kind of, by this point, you've gotten used to the bosses and their mechanics, so it's a little bit similar. And then the last kind of like general notes that I have, if you're using Death Trooper outside of that team in phase 3, be really careful with the death mark, because if the kind of added support tunes on the side are up and you put death mark, it forces you to attack them. So if you don't have that much AoE, sometimes you can't kill the little minions on the side and you get a little bit screwed. I've done that more times than I'd like to admit, where I don't get assassin killed in time and I'm like, oh, death mark, and I apply death mark, and then assassin's sitting there on the side and I can't kill her, and then she stealths, and then I'm like, oh crap. And then the other thing to note about the bosses is they have a ton of tenacity. My little note says hella tenacity, stacking speed. So that's just something to keep in mind about just the way that they work. Let me see if I can find it here. Immunity, tenacity down. Whenever they take damage, they get stacking speed and tenacity. Then it ends at the end of the turn. But so you can't do like these endless cycles of attacking them, because they will start getting faster, and you can't like totally manage them with debuffs. So that it is a little tricky. So those are my main takeaways so far on this crazy raid. It's a lot. I think it's fun. I would like to know what your kind of simple general tips are. Leave them in the comments, and hopefully I have a new video soon for you guys, and I will see you on the next video.